Hey everyone, it's Boogeyman Ben. Hope everyone's doing well and everyone had a nice week. Happy Friday to everybody. Today's video that I want to do is I actually want to do another retrospective video. I haven't done one since I did the Texas Chainsaw movies, but this one is on a film that came out in 1989. It actually had one sequel that came out in 1992, and next to Salem's Lot, it is probably, I think, one of the scariest adaptations ever made. The film I'm talking about is Stephen King's Pet Sematary. I still think Pet Sematary is one of the scariest Stephen King films ever made. It was one of the scariest books next to Salem's Lot and The Shining, and it's just a true masterpiece in terms of a film. And I thought it was a good time to talk about this film, and I'll also talk about the book a little bit. But stay tuned for my retrospective on Pet Sematary, the novel, the film from 1989, the official adaptation by Stephen King, and of course the 1992 sequel, so stay tuned. So the idea for Pet Sematary initially came about from a couple of real incidents in Stephen King's personal life. One being that his daughter's cat Smucky was run over in the road in the highway near their house, and the other being that his son was nearly struck and killed by a truck. The subject matter for the story was actually so disturbing that King, who initially had his first draft completed in 1979, actually shelved the book, or this manuscript, until 1982 when he rewrote it and submitted it to Doubleday for publishing. Now, I read the book after seeing the film, which came out in 1989. That's just sort of the way I am. I don't like. I'm a real big movie buff, so I like going to a movie and not really knowing much about it outside of the plot. I didn't want to know too much of the story structure, so that was why I initially waited to see it. And that's just how I am with most books that are adapted into movies. I usually watch the movie first and then read the book. So since the movie was the first thing I saw, I'll start with the movie. So it was my 15th birthday when it came out, and I actually had several friends take me to see the movie. I actually had my friend Veronica, Marisol, and Christina take me to see this movie for my 15th birthday. And we were all scared shitless pretty much by the plot and the outcome of the story. It was a film that was the fact that it does deal with life and death, and it was pretty a hardcore movie when it came out, and I still think it holds up really well today. I think the subject matter is very grim. It's not a happy movie by any sense. It's very in your face. It's very there's a lot of traumatic scenes that happen in it, and it really leaves you exhausted when the film finally ends. But I still think it's a true masterpiece, and like I said, the film still disturbs me today when I watch it. Now, the stars of Pet Sematary are Dale Midkiff, who plays Lewis Creed, the great Fred Gwynne as Judd Crandall. You have Denise Crosby as Rachel Creed, Brad Greenquist as Victor Pascal. You have Miko Hughes as Gage Creed, and Blaze and Bo Birdhall as Ellie Creed. The film was directed by Mary Lambert, and the screenplay was done by Stephen King. Now, the plot of Pet Sematary revolves around the Creed family. Lewis, Rachel, their daughter Ellie, and their son Gage, and of course the cat Church. They moved from the big city to rural Maine. The movie was actually shot in Bangor, Maine, which is, pretty much a big fixture in Stephen King's stories is Maine, because that's where he grew up. It was shot in Bangor, Maine, actually down the street, I believe, from King's house. And the name of the town in the movie and in the book is Ludlow.
So they moved to Ludlow. Lewis Creed is now he's taken a job at the college as the college doctor. They encounter their neighbor, who's played by Fred Gwynn. His name is Judd Crandall. He's a widower that lives across the street. He brings to their attention the pet cemetery that is down the path from their house. Lots of subjects of death and sort of how you deal with death as a child, especially when you lose a pet. That's like a pretty big focal point at the beginning of the story because of the cat church. It's something that makes Lewis's wife Rachel uncomfortable. But as the story progresses, a tragedy happens where Church is killed in the road. Lewis goes to bury the cat in the pet cemetery, and it takes place over Thanksgiving weekend when his family is not there. And Judd tells him that there's a better place to bury the cat on the other side of the cemetery. So they actually go to the burial ground, Indian burial ground. Once they bury Church there, the cat comes back to life. Now, the scenes I still think are very creepy is the first encounter of seeing Church reanimated from the dead. It's a scene where Lewis goes back into his garage. It's a scene where he's just raking leaves, and then he walks back into his garage, and Church is there in the darkness, and you just see the glowing eyes and the sort of sinister meow he kind of lets out. I still think that's one of the scariest scenes in the movie because it's unexpected. You know something's going to happen, but you don't know exactly what. As the story progresses, though, the tragedy that sort of drives the rest of the movie is pretty. It's very hardcore, and Lewis's obsession with righting a wrong is what sort of propels the rest of the movie. And there's a lot of disturbing images in this film, especially the character of Pascal, who is a college student that's hit by a truck. Lewis's first day on the job at the college. He also comes back as kind of almost like a kindred, like not a kindred spirit, but kind of like he's there as like almost Lewis's guardian angel. Even though he's disfigured and disturbing looking, he comes back to sort of warn Lewis about the pet cemetery and the burial ground beyond. And then the other character that is very disturbing to see is Zelda, who is Rachel's sister that had spinal meningitis and died when she was a child. Those scenes are really disturbing, and it's imagery, like I said, that you just can't get out of your head. Now, the ending of the film is definitely not a happy ending, as with most of King's stories are. They're kind of, there are some that are exceptions to the rule, but the ending is pretty grim. The book is very similar. There's a little bit of an extra sort of wink at the camera at the end. But I think the most disturbing scene in the movie is the final. So yeah, the ending is pretty rough, and I think but it's one that just it leaves you like you. I mean, you won't forget it, and it does. It still is impactful even when I watch it today. It's a very disturbing ending. And I still think it's just one of the best. It was so great that Stephen King actually did this adaptation. Previously, he had done adaptions of. He did Cycle of the Werewolf for Silver Bullet. Of course, he did Creepshow and Creepshow 2. He had done Cat's Eye, which was a makeup of some of his short stories, as well as Maximum Overdrive, which was a short based on his short story Trucks. But this was the first time he had adapted one of his, award-winning #1 bestseller novels into a movie, and I thought he did a tremendous job. After seeing the movie and then reading the book, I mean, it's pretty much there's a couple characters that are kind of combined. There's a few characters that are omitted, but it's one of the most faithful adaptions of his work. I think tremendous credit must be paid to Mary Lambert, who did a great job directing this film. Originally, it was going to be George Romero who did it, but then he backed out of it. Tom Savini was also another name that was going to come in and direct the film. But Mary Lambert was primarily known at this time for directing music videos. I know she had done Madonna's Like a Prayer. She also had done a film called Siesta, which I haven't seen, but it was with Ellen Barkin, and she does a tremendous job directing this film. Really gives it her own voice while being faithful to King. And you really just, it's an eerie film, and it's just, she does a great job directing, and the actors and everything. Everybody is so well, everything's still well constructed in this film. I just think she did a tremendous job. I also think the another big positive for this film is the music done by Elliot Goldenthal. The music is completely eerie and really stays with you. In 1992, we would see a sequel to Pet Sematary, Pet Sematary 2. There's no one really that returns from the original film. Mary Lambert did return to direct. This time the screenwriter was Richard Oughton. Stephen King had nothing to do with this movie, and it's unfortunate because it would have been nice if he could have, maybe written a sequel to it or been involved. But you really feel that this is not a Stephen King movie, whereas the original Pet Sematary really did feel like a Stephen King movie. The basic premise of this focuses on the character of Jeff, played by Ed Furlong, who had just come off of Terminator 2, so he was a hot property at the time. He plays Jeff Matthews. And him and his dad, Chase, moved to Ludlow, rural Ludlow, where his mom was actually grew up, and she became a big actress, and she's killed at the beginning of the film during a movie that she's shooting when there's an accident on set. So Jeff is completely grief-stricken. When Jeff begins school, he meets a boy named Drew. His father, or stepfather, I should say, is the local sheriff. His name is Gus. He's played by Clancy Brown. Drew has a dog named Zowie, and he had told Drew to keep his dog from attacking Gus's rabbit. Zowie gets at the rabbits. Gus hears him, and he shoots the dog. Drew tracks down Jeff the next day when Jeff is going to school and says that he wants to bury the dog in the Pet Sematary, and they end up going to the Micmac grounds from the first movie, and when they bury Zowie, he comes back to life. Now, Pet Sematary 2 is a pretty good sequel. I don't hate it like some people do. I actually think it's pretty good. It's nowhere near as good as the original. I think one of the weaker points of it is that it's just a small gripe for me, but they didn't shoot it in Maine. They shot it in Georgia. Yeah, the town center that you see in this movie is actually the same town that they use for Woodbury currently on The Walking Dead. Ed Furlong is good as Jeff in the film. You really never sort of embrace him because he's just, at the beginning he seems like a nice kid, and then after his mom dies he becomes this kind of bitter kid. He's good in it, but you never really embrace his character because he's sort of withdrawn and angry all the time, and he just comes off as a little punk. But I liked him in it, but I really liked the character of Drew Gilbert, who's played by Jason McGuire. I think he's the heart of the movie, and I think he really stands above in terms of character Furlong's Jeff character. So I really liked him in it. I also like Clancy Brown. Clancy Brown's characterization of Gus really brings kind of like a little bit of menace as well as black humor to the story. I also thought Anthony Edwards was really good as Chase Matthews, who is Jeff's father. He does a good job in it. Both actors are really good in it. But the overall story is just not as strong as the first movie, and it would have been nice if there would have been a few ties to it. There is on Halloween in the film, there's the kids go to the Pet Sematary and tell ghost stories, and they tell a story about Ellie Creed, who was one of the survivors from the first movie, killing her grandparents, and no one knowing where she is, and that she was maybe coming back to the town. I thought, it was a ghost story, but I thought that would have been really interesting if they could have brought maybe a character back from the original film. And I think Mary Lambert does a good job directing this film as well. There's a lot of creepy imagery in it, but the thing I think that this one didn't get as right as the first one did is there's almost a little too much humor in it. There's times where things are really serious and then there'll be like this weird sight gag and you're just kind of like, is that supposed to be taken seriously or is that supposed to be a goof? So yeah, I never really warmed up to this one as much as the first one. I did like it. I did like that it was set in the same locale, but when you do a sequel and you have none of the original principals coming back, it's a little tough. Plus, to Stephen King's name not being on it, you really feel that it's not a Stephen King film. Things were taken much more seriously in the original Pet Sematary. Pet Sematary 2 is a little goofy in some regards. And some things just don't make sense in Pet Sematary 2. But again, I like the film. It's fun. If I had to rate both of them, I mean, the first Pet Sematary gets a 10. I would give Pet Sematary 2 a 7.5. I mean, I still like it. It's not my favorite, but it's still a fun watch, and I enjoy watching it. And Mary Lambert did a great job, like I said, directing it. Love the film Pet Sematary. I appreciate everybody listening to this retrospective, and tell me what you think. I'd like to hear some other people's thoughts about Pet Sematary, the movie, the sequel, the book. Also, I did hear that there's a Pet Sematary documentary that's being made. It's called Unearthed and Untold: The Path to Pet Sematary. It's I think it's independently funded. What I'll do is I'll put a link to the Facebook page below. I'm anxious to see this. I've been seeing that they're getting some good actors from the film to do interviews and everything, so I'm really looking forward to seeing it, and I'm glad that people are still talking about this tremendous, scary movie. So thanks, everyone. Hope everyone has a nice weekend. Take care.